Medical innovation starts with medical discussion. Talking about the future and what comes next with Project Medtech.
Awesome. Thanks, Will. So that being said, we'll just start here with introductions from our two guests today. So we generally get a lot of questions around, raising funds. And so we've had hospital venture groups on, and so I think VC was the next kind of one we wanted to have and maybe talk about, hey, from a VC perspective, what do you look for when you're looking at a pitch deck, but also knowing that a pitch deck doesn't get a check, right? There's a lot of due diligence that happens. And so what are those next steps of, hey, these are major red flags for us. These are things we want to see. This is an instant screening thing that we're going to do. And so we figured we'd get Tom and Bill, who are both happen to be, I guess, local to the Midwest, but they, I believe, invest. They're pretty geographic agnostic. I'll kind of let them speak for that. But let's start with Tom and then Bill. Just maybe brief intros into who you are and then what group you're with.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll make it quick, Dwayne. So good afternoon, everybody. So Tom Shehab, one of the managing partners of Arboretum Ventures. Background, physician and healthcare executive. I spent a long portion of my career at Trinity Health, and then 8 years ago came over to Arboretum. Arboretum is a healthcare-only venture capital firm in Ann Arbor, Michigan, founded here. We remain here, 16-member team, 5 funds investing out of our 5th fund, which is a $250 million fund, so roughly $750 million of assets under management. We invest only in healthcare, and within healthcare, we do everything except for classical pharma. We won't make a bet on a single molecule. So we still do roughly 50 to 60% med device and diagnostics, the FDA pathway, and then healthcare IT, healthcare services, and life science tools, along with what we call pharma adjacencies, which allows us to invest in the pharma space without having to make a bet on the molecule. So all of the enablers of pharma. So I'll stop there and happy to go into more detail as we move along if people have questions.
Great. Bill?
Hi, everyone. I'm Bill Trainer, co-founder of Mutual Capital Partners. We're a Cleveland-based venture fund that I started 17 years ago. We're actually just finishing up our 3rd fund, raising our 4th fund, much smaller than Arboretum. We're only 3 partners, 110 million of assets under management. We'll be raising $75 million 4th fund. And we like to invest in med devices, digital health, and opportunistic B2B software, especially when it touches into the healthcare hospital space. Our check sizes is much smaller, but we're very, very involved with our companies. Not that Arboretum isn't. We take a rifle shot approach, very different from a lot of funds. So our average fund is making 6 to 7 investments across the spectrum. So we take a very hands-on approach with our companies and try and help them out all along the way.
Great. So guys, let's start with, and by the way, for everyone who's joining and hasn't been a part of these, you have questions, you can either digitally raise your hand, I think, through like one of these reactions down here at the bottom of the screen, or you could just pipe in, but until people have questions, I guarantee I can fill an hour full of questions. So please interrupt me. So Tom, Bill, let's start with like executive summaries and pitch decks. That's oftentimes the first step to getting to a VC's desk. What are some of the things that you're looking for right off the get-go? And what are some of the things that, hey, if you see that in there, you know what, it's kind of just like this is a good, throw this one out, right? Or do you really give every single one its proper due diligence? I'm just curious on that process. And Bill, we could start with you and then move to Tom.
Yeah, when we first got started, you're trying to find deal flow. So, we had good connections, but fast forward to today through COVID, our deal flow more than doubled. So we're seeing about 3,000 things a year, and you can't look at everything directly. So we have developed some screening criteria that helps us. Probably, the first thing we look for is a qualified intro. If we get a qualified intro from one of our investors or a close connection to the fund, another check writer, could be a larger fund or a smaller fund, but that constitutes about 75 to 80% of our deal flow. And we take pay close attention to those as well. Although if it's a pre-revenue company or it's based in a geography that's a little difficult to get to, and we actually constitute California as one of those geographies these days, given kind of the crazy labor issues going on out there and cost and everything else. So that helps to narrow our screen down a whole bunch. Also, candidly, if we see something in clean tech or, hardware or, massive enterprise software applications, as Tom mentioned, we don't do pharma at all. We have done device or diagnostic investing in the past, but we're probably straying away from that, just given the capital intensity in our history. So yeah, we just try and apply 4 or 5 things to narrow it down, and very quickly the 3,000 things kind of gets down to a few hundred that look interesting, and then you really start to pay a little more attention to that executive summary and the follow-up information. But high level, that's how we start.
Tom?
Yeah, no, I think Bill outlined it very well. I think we have very similar approaches. I think maybe I'll comment on the second part of your question, Dwayne, is what kind of catches your eye or what doesn't catch your eye. I mean, I think that, things that come in over the transom that are not a warm handoff. I think the materials, it's a little bit like anything. You've got a minute of somebody's time, right? A minute or two. So it sounds really simple, and this is a group of professionals on this, but it's got to be succinct. It's got to be clear. It's got to be user-friendly. If it's an executive summary, I think it's about the things we're going to talk about as the day goes on. It's got to make sure that what does the company do? Why do they think they can do it? And who are the people doing it, right? Those, I think, are the key things. Those often come across better in a deck. And I've seen people do it successfully where they send the entire pitch deck, and I've seen where they send a teaser deck, right? 4 or 5 slides that really get to the point. I think either way can be quite effective. I think that it is, I think one of the things that Bill said, which is really important, the quality of the content you send is really important. How it gets to us is also very important, right? We have a website you can just send things to. That's not going to get the same priority as if someone in our network who calls and says, hey, I really would like you to take a look at Julie's company, right? That really does help. And or, folks who have worked to be able to find a way to get to us, whether it be at a meeting or otherwise. I think this kind of speaks to some of the stuff we're going to talk about later. But when you look at our investments since 2002, between 55 and 60% of them, we never did the first time we met the team. We met them, we watched it mature. It wasn't the right time for them. It wasn't the right time for us, but it's all, I think you guys know this, it is an incredibly relationship-driven business. And so decks and executive summaries make a lot of difference. But I think the personal side of it really has significant importance.
Hey, Tom, you brought up a good point. So we work with we have a lot of companies right now who actually fortunately just closed rounds, right? And it was their seed round. So they're going to do a Series A soon. How much, I think the question always becomes is, with their current investors, they pretty much know how to manage those expectations and their reach out and how they follow up with them. But those investors who said, hey, not right now, but maybe next time, what does that look like from preferred contact method? Is it once a quarter? Is it when there's larger milestones? And so Tom, you start, and then Bill, you filter in here.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I've seen innumerable variations of folks doing that. What do I think is most effective? I think and I don't know that there's a dedicated frequency. I think quarterly sounds pretty frequent, to be honest, unless there's really a company moving and it needs to be that. But I think the key thing is, I'll just give you my own bias. Well, number one is if I met you at a meeting one time and you said you were going to follow up and you did, that makes sense, right? That's somebody who is going to follow up. If you say you're going to send me your quarterly investor report and you do, I think that builds relationships and builds trust. I think the main thing is when somebody says, this isn't the time right now, what we try to do is say, let me know when you hit this milestone. When you get FDA clearance, give us a heads up. That would be a really good time. Or when you're about to go out for the first fundraise, I'd be happy to hear it as the second or third person to hear your deck. It doesn't need to be perfect, right? Because I'm interested in your technology and the team. So I think the answer is There isn't a prescriptive way to do it, Dwayne, but I think the key thing that we look for is, how a person is when we first meet you and how you are in diligence speaks to how you're going to be after an investment, right? So we're building long-term relationships. And so I think the key thing is, if you say you're going to follow up, I think following up is important. If you say, I'll see you at a meeting, I think that's an important thing to do. I think that's part of the EQ side of this, right? In terms of building the relationship side as I look at it.
100%. I would only add that it seems to me that information is kind of your currency. And so make sure that that information is accurate, consistent, and concise. You're not going to get someone, if you've just closed a seed round, you're not getting that Series A money until you've proven some thresholds that are consistent with that level of investment. So it doesn't do you any good to provide so much information that maybe maybe an investor or potential investor is looking at it and gets turned off. I mean, it's kind of the same way with the whole pitch deck or the summary information. Put enough in there to get someone interested, put enough in there to get them to want to have a meeting with you. You don't have to write a whole business summary and a pitch deck. You definitely don't want to try and do it in a little summary or whatever else. Just give high level pertinent information, the who, what, when, where, why, and how, and get that meeting, especially if you have that qualified intro, and then take it from there. You'll have plenty of time to discuss verbally the old-fashioned way how you're running your business and your challenges and opportunities and strengths and weaknesses. So I really think a lot of entrepreneurs err on the side of either not communicating when they say they're going to, or they communicate, but they maybe communicate a little too much to future investors that, it's wonderful that you want to share your challenges and everything, but maybe keep that with your investor base and just kind of focus more on the qualitative and the quantitative highlights that will keep me wanting to pay attention to your quarterly newsletters when I get them. Because if I start to see things I don't really like, I just don't really have time to pay attention to it anymore. And it goes from kind of an interesting prospect to a less likely prospect.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah. And so, and I again, there's a lot of people on this call, but I know Bryce and Jeff, I know you both have raised seed rounds, I mean, relatively recently, right? And maybe you guys have done Series A recently as well. And so I'm curious on your thoughts here after I asked Tom and Bill. But a lot of times, so the pitch deck gets you to the next conversation, right? And then due diligence starts. And I think that a complaint we hear from a lot of investors, and actually we just heard one from one of our quarterly calls we do with some investors, is they see a lot of startups who on the pitch deck seem like they're ready to take on money. And then they go to start the due diligence process and immediately find out that they really aren't ready to go through due diligence or take on money. Bill and Tom, maybe just highlight, we'll start with Bill this time, those first steps into like, okay, you made it past this step. We're really interested. Now we're going to start digging into more. For people who haven't been through that, what do those first steps look like? How much of that is, if you start that and things go sour right off the get-go, is it tough to, is it unrecoverable? I guess I'm interested in that process.
Yeah, I would kind of say three things. The first is there's so much free information out there for entrepreneurs these days, and for VCs too. We all use NVCA standard documentation. We try to keep things very simple at the earliest stages because you don't want to sweat a bunch of time, money, and effort over things that, you could argue for weeks on end about registration rates. And then maybe you take a step back and realize that there's one IPO for every, 80,000 investments. So let's, keep them pretty simple and generic and basic and not worry about it, because 3 rounds from now, an investor may come in and have a completely different idea than you, and you're going to have to waive all that stuff anyway. So use the generic information. And that starts also with use the information like on setting up a data room. Don't start fundraising and literally have no idea what a sample due diligence request list is going to look like. It's going to want every kind of major document that you've been involved with since inception, and your plans for the future and everything else. So get started on that well in advance, so that you're not, delaying your process, because as we all know, time kills deals. Time allows for issues that are either under your control or outside of your control to happen that can cause someone else, whether it's another fund, to move away from a deal, or all of a sudden you get some news that, it's maybe not the worst news ever, but it sounds really bad in that little window of due diligence when you're trying to get an investor to come on board. You lose a customer, and you might have known it was coming, and maybe it's a good thing to lose that customer because they were a pain in the ass and they didn't do what they were supposed to do, and they didn't give you the gross margin. Whatever it is, there's always good data, behind it. But if it happens at the worst possible time and you're not prepared for it, or you're not focused on it, and it's, it happens, and the investor finds out without you telling them, that's a real problem out there. So that free to information is really, really important, and getting things set up as well. That's second, very, very important. And then I think the third, biggest thing is really just make sure that Tom mentioned it, whatever happens in the diligence process is a microcosm of what we're going to expect to see over the life of the investment. So make sure your team is prepared, make sure everyone is on point, make sure that, if there's any disagreement, you sure as hell don't want it coming out during the middle of your investor presentation, especially when you're in front of the whole investor group. So just, I'm not saying this is like an actor, but really do the homework in advance, so that your pitch down pat, and to whom you're pitching. I can't tell you how few investors pitch me that have no clue about anything we're doing. They will ask if I've done something like this, and it's on our website, or we just sent a press release out 3 months ago about the exact same thing. And so take 20 minutes, 30 minutes, go through LinkedIn, go through the bios, go through the press releases, do the diligence on a potential investor that is just a fraction of what they're going to do on you. And entrepreneurs should want to do that, because they're going to get married to these funds. They're going to be with them for a long, long time. I mean, if you're lucky, it's inside of 10 years. If you're not lucky, it might be longer than that. And so, or if you're really unlucky, it might only be a year or two, but that's a separate discussion. But I think those kind of three areas, the preparation in advance, it goes a long way to making a smooth, closing process, or at least courtship process, and pushing toward a closing.
Go ahead, Tom.
Bill killed that. That was perfect. I don't know there was much more I was going to say. In fact, he brought up the worst thing in the world, right, is to have the perfect pitch deck and walk in and have no idea who you're talking to, right, in terms of the background or what they invest in. So I want to echo what Bill said. He characterized it so perfectly. I think the key thing is, you don't need perfection, right? You want to have done the best to put together a data room. But I think the real thing is, nobody wants to invest in the person who's sure that they're the smartest person in the room, right? They may be the smartest person in the room, but there's a certain thing where we're going to get to know you. If you're faking it till you make it, right, it's going to come out at some point. And I'd rather know up front. So if the answer is our data room is up and running, but I know there's 3 things that are not in it yet, we're working on that, we'll have it 10 days from now, it's a perfect answer. Just make sure it's there 10 days from now, or else we know about it. So I think the key thing is, it's going to sound this way because, you watch Shark Tank, right? And a lot of people watch that. There's a certain affectation people take on. I think we invest in real people, right? And real companies, and they're going to have blemishes and they're going to have problems. And again, you do want to show well. I completely agree with Bill. But, on that first pitch, it doesn't need to be perfect, right? Perfect's the enemy of really, really good a lot of the time. But I think the transparency and the willingness to say, and I love this when I hear during a pitch, when I ask a question, they say, you know what, I don't know, but I'm going to find out and follow up with you, right? Rather than kind of going into a 25-minute rabbit hole, trying to explain yourself out of something, just say, I don't know, because as a VC, we should do the same thing and say, I don't know a whole lot about this, educate me, and then I'll get smarter as it goes on. So I really think it speaks to, in diligence, transparency, preparation, I think being clear with what's available and what's not, and not being afraid to say, you asked me for the following, can I clarify what exactly do you want, right? How can we help get that to you? I think that's the key thing for all of us, because we're looking at as we go along, right? It's part of the totality of the story, like Bill said, right? Everything around venture is a little bit like dating, right? There's the initial date, there's the subsequent dates, and it finally meets at the end, right? When you close a deal, whether that be marriage or whatever the situation is. But it is really much like a courtship. I think Bill characterized that perfectly. So nothing more to say there.
Awesome. I do want to take this to another point with both of you, but real quick, Bryce and Jeff, I'm just curious. We'll start with Bryce. Bryce, where are you at currently with your company? Is it NewView? Is that right?
Yeah, NewView Surgical,
Yeah.
new camera technology for minimally invasive surgery. Dwayne, we've raised a 9 million Series B in the fall, so 14.5 million to date through Angels, a family office, and one strategic. And would echo that, a vast majority of that 14.5 million has come through follow-on investments, and that's been about relationships and communication and honesty throughout the process over a 5-year time period. So
Okay.
a long time to build those kind of funds.
Yeah. And Bryce, I'm curious, do you see differences? I know this is VCs investing, but for yours, I'm curious, did you see, based on the different kinds of investors, different levels of due diligence?
Yeah, across the board, angel investors, right? So you had really sophisticated medtech investors that acted very much like a VC and expected a lot of that level of diligence. I had plenty of investors who just wanted to come along and put a lot of money in and didn't ask one question. So I've had the range, and I think you prepare for the strong diligence, and you build confidence that way. And I think word gets out, right? I think the other investors lean on those who they know are experts. And if those experts give you a good grade and say, hey, these guys are on top of it, they're making things happen, then the word gets out, particularly in the angel network across those organizations.
Great. Yeah. Just for everyone here, it's kind of surreal and like crazy in a way. Bryce, I think you were episode like 4 or 5 of MedTech Money. We're now on episode like 86. And I think
when 3.
You were 3, and you raised your seed round, I think, at the time. That's what you're on discussing. So anyways, congratulations. Jeff, curious for you, brief update of what you're doing, right? And then your kind of maybe, I guess, take on raising capital, the differences in due diligence, that kind of thing.
Right on. So I'm with Advanced Scanners. We build an optical tracking system that updates digital devices on the physician and patient anatomy in the surgical suite. We've raised $4.5 million in convertible notes from angels, and are now raising our first institutional money, Series A. And by the way, Bill, I just talked to Peter at Refinery this morning, and he asked me for a deck to send your way. So we might chat again. My experience has been very much like Bryce's. This is my first time. I've had many companies, but this is my first time having to raise money for a company. And there is a learning curve that are really table stakes to get into the game. And first, I learned, how to appeal to angels and what level of, what their expectations were. Now it's been another learning episode, trying to learn what VCs are looking for, getting there. Towards this end, I'd like to say it's very hard to get feedback that is actionable from most VCs. You get the kind of you're too early, or I want to stay in touch. So as far as and Tom, you said you do this. I have not had an experience with you, but you're rare in that you give the kind of feedback where here are kind of the milestones that we'd like to see. And from what I understand, there's some kind of checklist, or at a partners meeting where there's some discussion about these things. And just preaching, for my peers, if some version of that could make it back to us, that would be very helpful at some point.
And Jeff, I think that's a key thing. I'll just comment on us, right? I think part of it is our roots, right? We started in the middle of the country, right? In Ann Arbor, when Jan, my partner, had the idea in 2002, there wasn't a lot going on in VC at that point. And so I think one of the things we realized was we were here for the long term, right? We're going to stick around. And so giving people real feedback would benefit us. I don't know that we realized how much it would benefit us when you look at companies that we then invested in 5 or 6 years later, and somebody said, or some of the companies that we backed the same CEO 4 or 5 times because of the experience they had. And I think part of it was the transparency and the feedback. It's not easy, right? It's, sometimes you never want to tell anybody that their baby's not as pretty as they thought it was, but I think there are ways to provide that. And so we do try to provide that feedback. There are honest times where it just doesn't fit for us, or there are times where it's not you, it's us, right? We're in the middle of something going on and we have to pass, but we do try to do that. I think one of the things I respect most is we'll give a little bit of feedback, and every once in a while you have a CEO who really does need that feedback, and they'll reach out for kind of a follow-up. Like, can you provide a little bit more clarity on that? And, within the time frame we have, we try to do that, because I do think, particularly for us off of the coasts, I think rising water raises all boats, right? This is a team sport, and Bill and I have looked at things over the years together. We haven't done anything, but we want them to win. We want us to win. We want all of you folks to win. So I think feedback is really helpful. And I think the other thing is the feedback once you know somebody. If you spend a 40-minute pitch and that's all that you can ever do, and it's a company that really has challenges, it's hard to get all of it out, right? And so you try to share a couple of feedback tidbits. But I do think it's important. And I think that, if I think of our world of best practices, I think that is one to try to provide feedback when you can, but also know there are times where we'll really say it just doesn't fit, which often means we're working on something else similar. We don't want to be we're as transparent as we can be on that.
And I'm sure all that's appreciated, and I hope you get credit I know that's an extra effort. So I'm glad there's a reward you're seeing come back for it.
Thanks, Jeff.
Jeff, and it's definitely something, as Tom said, we've tried to do it as well. We're a much smaller organization, so it's a little bit, difficult. It's the law of numbers. With that being said, I think what's really unique too is it goes back to what I said earlier about the diligence on the fund. And a lot of entrepreneurs don't ask, okay, you've checked out the webpage and you've gone to their LinkedIn and everything else, but there's other stuff you can do. You can prepare in advance for a VC meeting where you're asking them 5 minutes of questions. And so few entrepreneurs actually take the time to ask me any real questions. And like a key question would be, where are you in your fund cycle? Because if I'm investing in year 5, that's a very different profile of company I'm looking for than in year 1. Where are you, have you invested in a company like mine before? Because sometimes you make an investment and it's not on your webpage anymore because it was a colossal failure. Most people don't put up we made the worst investment thesis of all time, and we're going to give it the same prominence as our current ones and our winners. And so there's a half a dozen questions out there I would completely want an entrepreneur to ask me. And maybe the last one is, hey, wow, that's great. You want to take the next steps and you want to talk to some of my customers. I'd love to talk to some of your CEOs, and I'd love to talk to some that you're currently invested with, you've invested with the past, and or especially maybe one that didn't work. I'd really want to understand that feedback from them. And we all have to stand by what we've done in the past. And I'm completely, there isn't a single investment we've ever made where you might hear some things that I don't want you to hear, but then again, I'm going to have my side on it. But at least ask the questions to get that type of access to information, because again, it's a marriage. You're going to be with them for a long time. It's good to understand where they're thinking or what they've learned or what they've done in the past, because it's probably again a microcosm of what will happen in the future.
That's very helpful insight. Thank you.
I was just going to add one quick thing because Bill was triggered in my mind. I think to Dwayne and the team, I think the world's changed. 8 years ago, if you wanted to hear how a VC did things, you had to go listen to them at a conference or you had to go to PitchBook. Right now with podcasts like this, there are a lot out there where I've had people come to pitch to us who've listened to a podcast from each of our partners and knows a fair amount where on these things, you know, there's a lot of transparency. So I think to the point, getting to know who you're talking to find out, do they fit you, right? This is a bilateral fit, right? And sometimes I know it doesn't feel that way, particularly when the macroeconomic situation is so tough, but you know, it is going to be a long-term. And then something Bill kind of alluded to that I think is key. I love when folks go out and diligence us, and I tell them, diligence us and ask how we are when things don't go well, right? Because every company is going to skin its knees. It happens invariably. And so the real thing is it's very easy to be a happy cheerleader when the team is up by 48, right? It's a little bit more challenging to be that consistent partner when things are bad. And so one of the things that we really have thought about, and it predates me, is really being consistent and trying to take the waves we're invariably on in a very similar way. And I think that's important because I think Bill would agree. It's easy to be a good board member when things are going swimmingly, right? It's more important to be a great board member when things are not going swimmingly. And I think that's an important thing.
Yeah. So Tom and Bill, I will say it does sting a little bit when clients we're working with are asking for help and support and maybe we're reaching out and making introduction. And then we find out that the person we introduced him to was on the podcast and there was an hour discussion about pretty much everything you need to know, and they didn't listen to that podcast. So it is, especially because it's ours, it's even a little more frustrating, but that's okay. So Tom and Bill, I'm curious on something we talk about. So I don't host Medtech Money, Giovanni does, but I do edit all of them. And so it's like I'm doing them well. And then we have the own Project Medtech series. So we're almost at 200 episodes. In all the investor ones we've talked to, every single episode, with the exception of one person, and I'm not going to call them out, but every single investor said team is the number one thing they are investing in. And then after that, 2 and 3 get a little back and forth depending on who it is, right? So everyone equates it to horse racing. So I don't know if like horse racing is really big in the investor world, but everyone says they bet on the jockey first, and then the horse, and then the track, right? And so the horse in this metaphor generally is technology. The track is the problem. And that's where we have people debate, right? Some people say, look, we are investing in, if the team doesn't fit, we're out. So the one person said, that you could replace the team. He was a very early stage investor, and he said he doesn't care about the team because he can replace them. And I was like, that's cold, but I get it. So anyways, team, problem, solution. Do you guys agree on that order? Is there anything else that you say, hey, actually there's a fourth one you're not thinking of that we rank higher? Or do you, is problem and solution really variable depending on the situation? I'm just curious on your thoughts on this as well. And so Tom, you could start and then go to Bill.
Yeah, I mean, I think I generally agree with what you said, Dwayne. I think the answer is, it depends on where you are on the cycle, right? I think the first thing is market is a big thing, right? What's the problem in the market? Because I think there are some markets that are too small that even the world's best team, you know, for us, it's not going to be big enough. And so I don't want to say that it over prioritizes, because across the continuity, or I'm sorry, across the time period you're invested, it is the team. But the team, you can flex teams, right? You can bring in new talent, you can do different things. So I would say that, you know, it is a close number one, and number 1.5 to me is it a market that has a compelling need that's going to be able to generate a return? And then the second thing is the team that can do that. And then I think after that is also the technology. So I think they are all in the top 3. I think the other 2 things I would add that are not at the same level, but particularly given we're talking about med tech, right? I think IP is really high in what we do, right? I think it has to be. And I think the answer is, you know, what else is there out in the market? I think those things are all, you know, if you think, so I'm a physician by background, you know, so you do pattern recognition. I think those 4 or 5 things fall into my pattern recognition very quickly, right? And so is it a big enough market? Can you make a difference? Does this technology do it? And then can the team pull it off? I think those are the things that are, so how we rank those, Dwayne, I think it depends on the day, but it also depends on whether I'm seeing it at the first time, or I'm seeing it 6 weeks into doing diligence, because long-term, the team is going to get you there. But if you look at historically, there are an awful lot of teams that start a company and aren't the ones who finish in the same roles they were in, right? It's hard to scale a company. Often the founders will have a role, a very important role, but there are times where, we've certainly had CEOs tell us, right? We all know I'm not the IPO CEO, right? I got us to this point. Let's figure out where to go. So I think team is extremely important. They need to be able to execute. So I'll stop there and turn it over to Bill.
Yeah,
I would
Bill,
just
you
add-
go ahead, and then Joe, I do see your hand up. We'll come to you after Bill answers. Yep,
I
go
would
ahead,
just
Bill.
add one sub point to what Tom said, and then a kind of a fifth idea in there. The sub point is, with a smaller fund like us, we don't necessarily need to see as big of a market as what Tom mentioned, especially for larger funds like what he's investing out of. With that being said, you also can't capitalize a business the same way in a smaller market. So if the average med tech company needs $30 to $50 million, to round trip successfully, if you're in a smaller market, you just have to proportionally take that amount of capital down, which makes it that much harder for everyone involved, because chances are you're going to run into the exact same commercialization execution problems, almost given any amount of funding. And it's the education process is really, really high with customers. But I would say that the fifth thing, and it's not quite as important as the team, but it is really high up there. And we would walk away from something if we didn't think that there was the right, call it investor board alignment. If you don't have a good syndicate where they're all aligned the same way, you're going to have problems later on, because an angel investor that got in at a $5 million valuation is going to have a very different idea of what success for him or her at exit than what we would investing at a 20 or $25 million valuation. So you got to make sure that alignment is there, because the minute one person or two people start rowing in a slower or the wrong direction, it doesn't matter how good the team is or how good the opportunity is. It's real easy to get off pace. And in the meantime, time is your enemy in venture. Someone else is out there trying to catch up to you or pass you, or at a bare minimum, obfuscate your ability to clearly differentiate yourself in the marketplace, which again adds more time. Time is money. Money lowers your IRR. Time lowers your IRR. It's all about, getting out there, staying out there fast, and doing something before the market realizes what you're doing or decides to build versus buy.
That's a great point.
Awesome. Joe, you had a question?
Great. Thanks, Dwayne. Tom, how are you? Good to see you
Hi,
again.
Joe. Good to see you.
Thanks. I'd like to ask a question around a Series A investment and how you evaluate a Series A investment may be different than a seed investment. Is there a different priority that you place on the technology team problem? Is there different types of information you're looking for in a Series A that you might not look for in a seed?
Yeah, maybe I'll take that first, and then Bill can answer. I'm going to speak, I think, because we're on the Medtech podcast, I'm going to think a little bit more of kind of an FDA pathway technology going from Series C to Series A. I think that number one, for Series A, and Bill alluded to this, you have to have accomplished a certain number of things prior to going out to the Series A. And every company, it's slightly different, right? So, you've gone from your prototype to a research trial ready type of device. You may not have your FDA pathway, or at least you should have your pathway laid out, let's say on the FDA side. You don't have to have it perfected, but you need to be able to know what that pathway is, because you're presumably going to use your Series A money often to get your FDA clearance. I think that there are often team competencies that exist in the seed that may not exist in the Series A, meaning you may have to bring on a couple of critical people, right? And you should be able to identify who those people are, and they're part of your plan, right? I plan to hire this role when the Series A comes in because they will help us to facilitate the following. I think in this world, right, 10 years ago, we might have said the 2 R's, regulatory and reimbursement were equally hard and equally important. I think now reimbursement is a massively larger R, not that regulatory is not important. So in the Series A, you don't have to plan on reimbursement, but you have to have a plan on how to get a plan, right? I think that's a very important thing, because if you look at the delays, they happen on the reimbursement side more than anywhere else. And it's a harder course of action. And the answer may be you don't have that person, but that's your key hire then to help you to figure out that. So I would say all you're doing is you're upping the level of the game between the two things. But you really, when we think about a Series A, you've taken something that was an interesting science experiment, right? And you have enough wraparound to make it feel like it's something to build a company around. So that's kind of my subjective evaluation of it. And you don't have to have perfection, but you have to have a plan on how to get those really key boxes checked as you go into that transition. Joe, did that make sense?
Yeah, Tom, thank you. That's great. That was helpful.
Bill, do you have more to add to that?
I think just giving the small fund perspective on that, we would tend to only go into, that's where the syndicate partner, in our view, would be as important, and maybe, you know, let's just call it as important as everything else to us, because we're such a small fund. We, you know, time is that enemy, and sometimes the FDA stuff goes a little bit longer than what you would think, and you just have to make sure that you've got enough horsepower around the table to, you know, you hate to say protect, but to some extent you're protecting the time and the effort that everyone, the money that you put in. And sometimes it's outside of your control. The FDA, sometimes it's just a little longer than what it should be for things outside of all of our control. And so it's for smaller funds, it really does boil down to making sure there's a deeper pocketed syndicate partner that's kind of driving the ship. We can be very helpful and rowing real hard, but you need someone rowing and steering. And if they're not there, we would not take that type of risk profile. We would in like digital health, where you're not necessarily looking for an FDA approval, or you're betting more on a proven team that's, you know, they've been there, done that. They're going to, you know, try something different. And you're betting on the past success of that team to and trying to help them figure out that market. But that's very different than like a pure med tech play.
Right. Thank you, Bill.
If other people have questions, feel free to jump in. I think one came up earlier, Bill and Tom, and you kind of mentioned it, right? Of, hey, if this is year 5 of the fund and this is your 7th of 7 investments, right? That changes than if it's your first year. I think maybe just based on a lot of our listeners on the podcast and the questions they have, can you just walk through the mechanics of how various things affect how your maybe investment thesis might not, I guess, change drastically, but does ebbs and flow a little bit, right? Like if you get an early exit, does that mean you're going to be more aggressive, more conservative? I guess maybe just walk through some of those types of things as well, because I think the mechanics of how a VC operates is obviously people can read about it and are known, but the actual mechanics of it could be a little difficult to understand. So Bill, if you want to start and then go to Tom.
Yeah, I've seen a little bit of everything. I raised my first fund in 2000, and so unfortunately I have seen and heard about everything. And you mentioned a great thing about, you know, you have an early exit. I think that does change the investment profile of a number of funds, only because, but it boils down to a bunch of different things. How much money do the GPs, the VCs really have in their own fund? If they've got a bunch of money in their own fund, they're probably going to stay pretty true to their investment thesis and not let an early exit cause them to, oh, now we're going to go way earlier on things because we're playing with house money and this and that. I mean, I think that's when you see those mistakes happen early in funds, fund 1, fund 2 type, cycles. And often you don't get to see them raise fund 3 and fund 4 because they just make stupid, dumb early mistakes. They stray away from their business thesis. But, take, for example, that question around year 5. I mean, in year 5, we're not going to make an investment in a business with pre-revenue because you've got roughly a 12-year fund horizon. Sometimes that stretches out. We've been fortunate all of our funds have exited inside of 12 years, but let's say it's 15 years or less. That's pretty rare for venture, but it's crazy the way it used to be 20 years ago. You used to try and get all your fund returns in the first 8 years, and that's just not as easy to do, especially in medtech. These days, you might get lucky with a web 3.0 thing or something like that, but that's usually not the case in medtech. And so I think it varies by fund, but for us, we're looking for more of a post-revenue commercialized. I want to see a whole bunch of customers jumping up and down, happy to use the technology. It's better for the docs, it's better for the patients, better for the systems, better for the payers. You see the combination of those four things. We'll pay up a little bit in valuation. We'll put together a good syndicate, and we'll try and exit inside of 10 years in that business, and ideally way less than 10 years. I think the other thing that kind of comes into play too is what is the composition of the whole fund? If you're going to make 10 investments and 5 of them are in orthopedics, but your original thesis was like 3 in orthopedics, 3 in cardiovascular, and 3 in neuro, like you're probably not going to make that 6th investment because it strays too far away from your thesis. You can do it, but if it doesn't work well, it's clearly like it's a beacon for institutional money and your sophisticated investors to hone in on and question why you made those decisions. So it really is a combination of stage and the type of business as well, the further out you get in a fund life cycle.
I'll just add a few things. I think Bill covered it really well. I think everybody does fund construction a different way. And I think, we have some basic principles that really haven't changed since 2002. And it sounds silly, but our North Star hasn't changed. We invest in capital efficient companies that drive the costs out of the healthcare system while improving healthcare quality. And I only mention that because we were thinking about the cost of healthcare. Again, we, meaning our organization, in 2002, when very few people were thinking about that. So we haven't really changed that. I think our second mantra is we're opportunistic while also sticking to our knitting. And so I guess what it means in terms of when we think about portfolio construction, I completely agree with Bill, right? It's a little bit like playing poker. If you have a good night 1, and then you triple down, that's not the good thing to do. We look for the best opportunities that we think we're the best investor for. And then regardless of where we are in the fund cycle, we'll invest in that. Now, to Bill's point, we go out opportunistically, so we're unlikely to do 3 technologies that overlap with each other, right? We probably wouldn't do 2 that overlap with each other, same space, same type of technology, but we really are opportunistic across the areas of the healthcare we invest in. We look for the best deal in order to do that. And we try not to change our thinking too much at the end of a fund or a beginning of a fund. That doesn't mean we don't talk about it, doesn't mean that we don't think about how to do it, but it's a little bit like there are certain things in life you just can't time as much as you want to. And if you spend a lot of time doing that, it can be a real challenge. I think where Dwayne's question comes from is if I'm an entrepreneur and I want to get some clarity, I would not assume that if somebody's doing a 12 investment fund and they're looking at you for investment 11 or 12, that they're going to handle that differently. I would just ask, is it different if we're the last investment in your fund? Because for some funds, it's very different. For some funds, it's not different at all. And so I think the clarity is really about the conversation you can have, right? And you're not going to get anyone's full inside baseball, but I think it does show a level of sophistication to ask about that. But I think the real thing is, unless it's an extenuating circumstance, if you've got a fabulous company, a fabulous team, a fabulous technology, and a fabulous space, people are going to try, they're going to work what they can to fund the company, right? I think that's an important thing if they have the capital to do so.
Yeah, that's great. And Tom and Bill, real quick, I'm guessing that if an entrepreneur comes in and has this kind of knowledge and these kind of questions for you, does that give you more confidence in that individual, or is that more, because I know you guys both talked about being asked questions, or is that more just like yeah, that's great that they know the inner details, but
it doesn't hurt me.
Yeah.
And I think it's a balancing act. I think polish is great, but polish on substance is better than just polish, right?
Good.
So I don't want to have an intellectual debate about this if it's not somebody they want to back.
Yeah, great. John, I see your hands up.
Yeah, you guys mentioned some of the deal breakers in the founding team, like if there's an immediate lack of follow through, they didn't do what they said they were going to do. On the flip side, can you talk about like, are there some gaps or deficits that you're most willing to overlook on a startup team that you're kind of okay with addressing? Like if it's a first time founder, or is it somebody that, you know, may not have led a startup before? What gaps are most easily addressed?
Yeah, I mean, you know, John, I want to clarify. I mean, I don't think the lack of follow-up, right, isn't a killer. Nothing ever kills a single deal or a single team. I think the answer is, based on the stage of the company, you are willing to show, I think, more patience and grace for someone. I mean, here's the deal, and I mean this word in the greatest sense of the word. You want people who are hustlers, right? They're going to work hard. They want to learn. And so I think no matter how old you are as a CEO, if you're curious and driven, right, in an appropriate way, and you have a deficit and you acknowledge, hey, we dropped the ball on that, right? That's fine. I now know you're going to tell me when you drop the ball in the future. That's okay. That doesn't close it out. It's when I find, like Bill said, you find something out that invariably is going to come out that wasn't told us up front, right? That kills a relationship and a long-term relationship pretty quickly. So I think, back to my point about being genuine, I think being genuine, and if the answer is, I don't know, say you don't know, and we'll see if you're somebody we want to work with to figure out what the answer is.
That's a great way of saying it, Tom. I mean, deals usually die death from 1,000 cuts, but with that being said, if the cuts kind of stop, you're going to heal over and you can push through. And so, you know, just make sure the cuts aren't too deep and they're not too frequent, and it's probably not going to scare us away, because every company has challenges. Every one of it just all is about how hard is this team going to work to overcome those challenges, and you know, how open and honest are they? How, you know, there are certain things you just can't get over. I mean, it's you know, you said you're expecting FDA approval imminently, and you know, you're in the diligence process, and you find out the FDA submission hasn't taken place. Like, you know, that there's stuff that's just so blatantly obvious that but those are more of a character type things. And so as long as there isn't like a massive character defect, and the other stuff, the rest of the team, the market opportunity, the benefit ultimately to the whole health system is there, you know, we can dive in and try and figure anything out, because you know, we're Midwest investors. We don't have the ability to just sit on Sand Hill Road and have things walk into our office every day that could be billion-dollar exits. We've all got to get out and do a little bit more work here in the Midwest, and you know, especially smaller funds like us. You know, Arboretum's built a nice beachhead, and they've been a role model for, you know, a bunch of us smaller funds on what we're going to do. So, you know, glad Tom was on here, because you know, that type of, you get one of the best groups in the Midwest. River Cities is another great example. You just get some great funds out there, and they're aspirational for all of us.
Thanks, guys.
Hey, Bill, Tom, thank you so much for this. For everyone who tuned in, our next event from a virtual happy hour perspective is August 25th. That one is on navigating the complexities of the U.S. healthcare reimbursement system. And then we also have one September 7th, which is a Wednesday. That's on right-sizing your medtech company's quality system. And then for anyone who is willing to travel, we have an in-person startup symposium. Actually, quite a few people on here will be a part of that in some fashion in Houston, Texas, October 6th and 7th at the Texas Medical Center. All of this is on our website. If you have any questions, you can email me or message me on LinkedIn. But thanks for joining. Tom and Bill, thank you so much for your time. Super informative. I know I asked a lot of questions, but these are all frequently asked questions from folks who are writing into the podcast. So really appreciate your time today.
Hey, Dwayne, thank you. And Bill, one of these days we're going to find the deal to do together. And today just makes me even more sure about that.
I know, Tom. I know. I'll follow up with you offline. Take care.
All right. Be well, everybody.
Bye, everyone.